Good afternoon. Our speaker next week will be Jim Davis, who is the president of Chevron Energy Solutions. Jim will talk to us on integrating renewables and efficiency in the energy mix at Chevron. Our speaker today is our own Professor Bob Metcalfe. Bob is Professor of Innovation and Murchison Fellow of Free Enterprise in the Cockrell School of Engineering here. Do you all know what Bob is famous for? Yes, you all know. He's the inventor of the Ethernet, which he invented in 1973. On May 22nd. The same year the same year he got his PhD on packet communication from Harvard University. He also founded 3Com Corporation, which is now a part of HP. So he has done very, very big things in life. And then in November 2010, he was selected to lead innovation initiatives at the UT's Cockrell School of Engineering. He has also received numerous awards and recognitions. For example, the IEEE Alexander Graham Bell Medal, the IEEE Medal of Honor, and the National Medal of Technology. He was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame in 2007. So we are really delighted that you're here to talk to us on investing in energy innovation, Bob. We look forward to what you have to say. Thank you.
So we don't know each other that well, so let me start with 3 disclaimers. One, you didn't hear anything in that resume that had anything to do with energy. That could be a problem, considering the topic. Second, I have more collected thoughts than we can possibly squeeze into the allotted time. So I'm hoping that you're going to ask me questions and guide me through it. And third is I'm from New York, and I've been annoying for a very long time. And coming to Texas didn't help, because it turns out Texans are annoying too, although in a completely different way. So I apologize in advance for and some of the ideas that I'm going to share with you today are, I have confirmed over and over again, are annoying to people. I make fun of Al Gore, for example, and I know all of you voted to give him the Nobel Prize. So that's so the topic is investing in energy, and like I said, I have that many slides, some of which toward the beginning are collected thoughts from the last 5 years, and then the last 5 are I tacked on this afternoon to make some more recent points. Would anyone like to, having heard all that so far, does anyone have a question that I can use to get started? Thank you.
Where's the biggest innovation coming from in energy today?
The question was, where is the biggest innovation in energy today? So we have to look at each of the words in that question. Where? It took me I had to move to Texas to learn that Texas is the energy state, and where the biggest stuff in energy is happening in Texas, surprisingly. But that's probably not what you meant. The biggest news in energy innovation is horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracking, which is highly controversial, but to me enormously good news. And that happened in Texas. And but as I'll get to further my comments, we can't stop there. That is, we have this bridge to the future, and now we need to go across the bridge and develop other sources of energy, like, and I'll list some of them later, but solar, wind, nuclear, etc. Any other questions? Another question. Thank you.
How do you think we can overcome some of the government obstacles that this, such as poor funding and as we've seen in ethanol that just drove up the price of corn and food prices? How do you think we can overcome some of those hampers from?
So the question was, how do I think we can overcome some of the obstacles put in place by the government toward solving our energy problems? See, that is a really sad question, because I am absolutely scared to death at what's happening in our current government related to almost every topic, including innovation and energy. And I have a couple stories about that, including corn ethanol and Solyndra. I'll tell you my Solyndra story. I think we need to vote early and often. It's probably the way we're going to solve most of those problems. Do you have a third example of a government problem, by the way? Keystone, yes. Vote early and often. Yeah. You have to change out the people who are voting against that, if you believe it's a good idea, which I do. But. Some more questions. Yes, sir.
In thinking about new technologies on the horizon, what do you think of technologies revolving around natural gas and the low price of natural gas relative to, say, oil, and the potential, just generally speaking, as it relates to natural gas? This is just very general.
Yeah. It's sort of a recurring theme. When I began investing in energy, which was 10 years ago, the shale gas, horizontal drilling, fracking thing hadn't really taken off. So we were preparing for what was then called peak oil. And there was a big rush to develop alternative sources. And then out of nowhere came this discovery. And I first caught on to it. A friend of mine worked for Shell Oil, and one day over lunch he told me that what was currently being discovered in the continental United States was a virtually infinite supply of fossil fuels, which you could either view as really great news because we know how to use those, or really bad news if you think that that's going to crush the development of alternative energy. And as I'll argue later, we should enjoy the decarbonization that gas is. Gas is replacing coal now, mostly, and decarbonizing energy by degrees. So that's good news. But we shouldn't let it kill, we can't let it kill our innovations in other energies, other energy forms. In fact, we should enjoy the bridge we've just received. Virtually infinite was the phrase that my friend, oh, by the way, he was a 30-year veteran of Shell Oil Company. So he knows what he's talking about. So and that was just a few years ago. So that was a big change over the last 10-year period. And a lot of the early investing in energy that I'll touch upon later was done without that knowledge. And now here comes gas and oil. One thing we should learn to do is liquefy gas. So we should be working on that too. Well, let me get started. And if anyone has a question at any time or would like to yell out an insult, please feel free to do it. It would be welcome. So when I became a venture capitalist, 13 years ago, and the president of MIT, where I'm a trustee, she said that energy is a top priority and we all ought to be working on it. So I started working on it, which meant going to my partners at the venture capital firm and starting to become an investor in energy technology. But I had no background in thermodynamics or energy or anything. I'm an internet tycoon. It turns out a lot of internet tycoons decided around the same time to get into energy because it suddenly became the next big problem. So what I did is I tried to study the history of the internet and dredge up from it any lessons that could be learned from how we built the internet and see how they might apply to solving energy. So this was a talk I gave 43 times. It's also the talk that got me a job here at the University of Texas, I might add. Let me just give you a smattering of the lessons, not all of them. You've all seen this picture before. So it's actually a bunch of pictures stitched together of the Earth at night. Usually the person showing you this picture wants, especially if you're an American, wants you to feel bad. Because look at all that light leaking out of North America and all the relative darkness in the rest of the world, especially in South America and Africa and China. And I think that's the wrong lesson from this picture. I think this picture should motivate us to get the whole world to be lit up. In particular, it's not an invitation for us to darken the lit up world. And this has to do with conservation and solving energy. In the internet, if we're going to use that as I use it as a guide, when we started the internet, the first impulse was to conserve bandwidth, because the pitiful infrastructure of 100-year-old infrastructure of AT&T couldn't carry much bandwidth. So our first impulse in building the internet was conservation, just as it is in energy. And then we built the internet, and the question is, do we use less bandwidth now than that we've built the internet? Did we just conserve, does the internet sort of conserve bandwidth? The answer is no. We use, I don't know what the actual number is, but I'll say 1,000,000 times more bandwidth than we did before we built the internet. So that's a different mindset than the conservation mindset. When we're done solving energy, if the internet is any guide, we will have more energy. We will have a squanderable abundance of energy when we're done. Cheap and clean energy. So that's one, that should be annoying. It's just a little annoying. Now this doesn't mean, let me see, my favorite guy. So at the beginning of this 40 city speaking tour, Al Gore was in his prime. He got a Pulitzer, as I recall, and then a Nobel Prize. And we had what was, I would call, the global warming bubble, which has since burst, as I predicted it would. And how could I predict that it would burst? Because all bubbles burst. That's the nature of bubbles. And the internet is a... but during that bubble, we had lots of excited ideas that how we were going to stave the onslaught of global warming, and we had to do it in a hurry because the polar bears were dying. And have I annoyed anyone yet? I'm trying my best. Anyway, so in this annoyance, in this enthusiasm to solve global warming, we made a bunch of mistakes, and here's one of them, corn ethanol. And every time I put this slide up, I usually ask, how many people think corn ethanol is a really good idea? And I ask for a show of hands. I'll ask for a show of hands now. How many think corn ethanol is a really good idea? I can't get anyone to raise their hand. Somebody voted for this thing. What? No, thank you. I've not asked this question in Iowa or southern Illinois, where they grow all the corn. I have a feeling I'd get a different answer. But this was an emotional mistake. This is the law of the land, by the way. So even though none of you raised your hands, somebody did in that place, putting up all these obstacles to energy innovation. And one of the mistakes made here was a category mistake, which is we thought we could manipulate corn as a fuel without interfering with it as a feed or a food. And that's what we learned really quickly, that if you jack the price as a fuel, the price gets influenced in these other categories because corn is corn. And that was a mistake which we had better fix sometime. But this came out of the hysteria of the global warming bubble. Instead, just to preempt some annoyance, I'm not claiming there's no global warming. I'm just saying the global warming bubble burst. And this is, but during that time, energy became a movement, and all movements have symbols. They have commandments, and they have gods, and they have heroes, and they have colors. So what is the color of the energy movement? Green. And so I checked the absorption spectra of photosynthesis, and I've discovered that even plants don't like green. That is, well, that's why they're green. So I looked for another color during this period, looked for another color for energy, and I came up with blue as being the color. So let's let the environmentalists keep green, and those of us who want to solve energy, why don't we have a different color? And I propose that it be blue. And I want you to know that that suggestion has not caught on. Now, this doesn't mean I'm personally against conservation. In fact, that's my car. That's not my wife, but that's my car. My wife is better looking than she is. So I'm all in that. So I sold a 12-cylinder Mercedes to buy a 3-cylinder Mercedes, and I'm very happy I did. And by the way, that's my small car. My big car is a Mini. That's when I need 4 seats. So I'm not against conservation. In fact, I often argue that what you should do is use the internet more to transport your bits instead of your atoms. And usually I make this point after having flown for 5 hours across the country, burning up all that jet fuel. I go into an audience and then I say this, and they say, why didn't you come via video? And I feel bad. Yeah, I should have come during video. And the internet had lots of surprises, and I have a bunch of them which I usually list, because it took not one weekend and not 1 month and not 1 year, but decades to build the internet. We're not going to solve energy over the weekend either, and that means there's lots of time for surprises when you have decades between you and the solution. And this is a really famous surprise. In the 80s, here's what we thought about the internet. We thought that for going really long distances, you'd use wireless microwave, either microwave towers or up through satellites. And then for local distribution, you'd use copper from AT&T to access the internet. What do you think the configuration of the internet is today? It is exactly the opposite. That is, we use wires to go, fibers in particular, to go long distance. And for short distance, we use wireless, Wi-Fi. Big surprises like that. There are going to be many of them in energy. There have already been some in energy. Now, this was a surprise, because a lot of us forget this surprise, because there was a bigger bubble burst since then. The mortgage bubble burst, and that was much bigger than this. But before the bursting of the mortgage bubble, we had the bursting of the internet bubble. The internet grew steadily through this bubble. It was the stock prices and investment that went wild, but the internet was growing. So if you draw a line, you'll notice that it's exponential growth. If you ignore this blip, there was straight growth. The same as, so bubbles don't necessarily reflect the fundamentals. Bubbles are sometimes evident on Wall Street without being evident everywhere. But that was a big surprise in the internet community. The impulse after a bubble bursts is immediately to go to Washington and pass laws to outlaw bubbles, because they can be very disruptive. But I argue that bubbles are a tool of innovation. That is the, excuse me while I tie my shoe. Innovating is very hard, and you have a thing called the status quo, which fights innovation, and it is extremely resourceful and mean and nasty. And bubbles are a way of overcoming the status quo. They're a tool of innovation. So although we lament the bursting of the internet bubble and of the global warming bubble and there's a bunch of bubbles punctuating the history of innovation, I'm a big proponent of bubbles and suggest that we shouldn't outlaw them, because to the extent we outlaw bubbles, we slow innovation down. So speaking of slowing things down, and your question, that's an aerial photograph of Washington, D.C., and one of the lessons of the internet was that when you go to Washington to get stuff, you often get the wrong stuff, because it's a pro-am, and we're the ams. And the pros, they live there, and they somehow get stuff different from what we want and need. We have to be very careful when we go to Washington. And one of my favorite examples of that is nuclear energy. As soon as the Department of Energy was created in the late 70s in order to reduce our dependence on foreign oil. Its budget is, well, it passed $25 billion a year a long time ago. And how are we doing on our dependence on foreign oil? We haven't fixed it. The Department of Energy is generally a waste of time. And another thing that it did was it stopped all progress on nuclear. So we have about 103 nuclear power plants, which is one less than we had last year. And we've had those 103 during the entire period since the Department of Energy was founded. They basically shut down the nuclear progress in nuclear energy, which I think was a mistake. And by the way, do you notice what color is in the middle of a nuclear reactor. What color? It's not green, is it? It's my proposal, blue. But Washington did actually help the internet. It wasn't a complete mess. In particular, well, for example, one of the things standing in the way of the internet was AT&T and IBM, both of which were the monopolies of the day. IBM monopolizing computing and AT&T monopolizing telecommunications. And frankly, I'm grateful to the U.S. government, which broke both of those monopolies so that the internet could blossom. So that was one thing. But the main thing that the government contributed in the evolution of the internet and is now contributing to the evolution of energy is the funding of research. So we, and where is the best research done? Not particularly here in Austin, but research universities. The United States has about 100 research universities. And what I've observed is that is the best place to put, the best place for society to invest its research dollars is in these universities. And by the way, in there, upper right, a little toward the back, is the #1 petroleum engineering department in the world, right over there. And then there's a bunch of other really good departments. Research universities in general, I believe, is where these research dollars should go, in particular into energy, as we're trying to solve energy now. Very quickly, another parallel that seems to be coming true is that the internet went from, I have not permanently tied this shoe. It keeps coming untied. So if I fall down suddenly, you know what happened. We started with mainframe computers and we ended up with microprocessors, you know, like this one. And it appears that in energy we're going to do the same thing. We're going from big centralized nuclear power plants, coal plants, and so on, to more distributed energy distribution generation. Another parallel is we discovered in the building of the internet that we needed storage. In the 70s, our national communication structure had almost zero storage. In fact, its goal was to carry communications in under 150 milliseconds. Now the internet is full of storage. There's gigabytes in this little baby, and there's servers full of storage, and the switches are full of storage. So we solved bandwidth with storage, and it appears we're going to do the same thing with energy. That is, before we finish building energy, solving energy, we're going to put a lot of storage in the network. And storage of many kinds, like batteries, like pumping water uphill, like there are now many forms of storage being developed. And another similar thing is that in computing, there's a thing called Moore's Law, which, have you all heard of Moore's Law? This inexorable decline of cost of computing or the density of transistors on a chip. Well, there seem to be similar laws at work in energy. For example, Professor Sachs at MIT has been plotting the cost of photovoltaic energy for a very long time, since the 70s. And it sure looks like an exponential, and it's going down. So eventually, if what I call Sachs' law continues, solar is going to be cheaper than coal and gas and oil. It's just not going to happen overnight. We just need to persist. So this is a slight digression, but I love it. If you believe that as I do, that the solution of energy will result in its squanderable abundance, then you get to brainstorm, what are we going to use that energy for? In the early days of the internet, I can assure you, we were not building the internet in order to upload videos of angry cats or what. It never crossed our mind there would be video on the internet, let alone uploading a video, and yet now most of the traffic on the internet is video, and a lot of it is YouTube. So the question is, what are going to be the YouTubes of energy? That is, what applications are going to be unleashed by squanderably abundant energy? That's a fun digression. There's a few that come to mind. One is we could go to space. So in the year 2070, there'll be, say, 10 billion of us, and 10% of us will either go to the moon or migrate to the Mars each year. And it turns out on the back of an envelope, and energy calculations, that would take about 500 exajoules per year which is about how much energy the whole human race uses right now, we could expend on trips to the moon or migration to Mars. And that's not so outlandish. 2070 is really far into the future, so it's possible we might be doing that. Another way to use a lot of energy would be to solve water. Water is a huge problem. Millions of people die every year because of water, even in this day and age. I calculated how much energy it would take to boil all the water that everybody needs on Earth. It turns out to be about 7.6 times the amount of energy that we all use today. Of course, we're not going to boil it, so that's kind of an upper bound. But a lot of energy could be spent on solving the water problem. Energy is generally a factor of production in most of what we do, and I'll return to this point a little later, but if we can reduce the cost of energy, that is, make it abundantly cheap, our whole economy will just automatically start growing more because it uses energy at every stage as a factor of production. And if you think there's too much CO2 in the atmosphere, here's a professor who, if you only gave him enough energy, he would extract all the CO2 from the atmosphere using that energy and thereby solve the global warming problem, if only we had abundance, squanderably abundant amounts of energy. Now, the innovations in the internet were accomplished by teams looking approximately like this. I apologize, there are no women in this picture. A lot of the teams do have women in them. This is the Google picture. On the left are professors at research universities. In the middle are scaling entrepreneurs and their students. And then on the right are the venture capitalists. So one of the lessons of the internet is that innovation is frequently done by startups emanating from research universities, in this case Stanford. And you can make many photographs like this. So maybe we should look forward to energy being solved by startups out of research universities. In fact, that's my main hypothesis. And this is this is my naming of a system many people understand. General Dorio was a Harvard Business School professor who invented modern venture capitalism about 67 years ago. And there's this, I posit, this ecology that produces startups that drive innovation, in particular energy innovation is the topic here. So we have the research professors, and incidentally, since I did this slide, I've added another species to this ecology, and that's funding agencies. So imagine inserting right next to the research professors the funding agencies that then fund their research, which they then conduct with their students, who then later become teamed with scaling entrepreneurs who sometimes get funded by venture capitalists, whose companies then make strategic partnerships with the incumbents and then sell their early innovative products to what I'm calling here early adopters. This is the system. I withdraw that word. I called it an ecology because it's much too messy to be a system. This thing evolved and no one designed it quite. So it's an ecology, not a system. And those are the major species occupying that. And this, I think, is the ecology which is going to solve energy. So now a few recent observations. In the 10 years I've been at this, are you familiar with that phrase, monetizing externalities, or carbon tax is another form of that. And I think what we have learned, or at least I have learned, apparently the government in Washington has not learned, going back to your question, is that increasing the price of energy is not a smart idea. Increasing the price of energy drives our economy into recession. And the correlation between energy prices and economic growth is stunning, and raising the cost of energy puts you into a low growth mode. In fact, it's my claim that the current economic mess that we're in started when oil hit $140 a barrel some years ago. The mortgage bubble was just a reverberation of an energy phenomenon. Energy prices skyrocketed, crushing economic growth, so all that speculation in mortgages, then the house of cards there fell apart when growth slowed down. So instead of increasing the price, monetizing, carbon taxing, doing everything you can to raise the price of the old energy that you'd like to grow out of. It's much smarter to instead reduce the costs of the alternative energy. So the effect is the same, that is to alter the relative costs of the old and the new, but to do it without killing the economy on the way. Because when you kill the economy, then you dramatically reduce your ability to innovate. So I believe that's a lesson of the last 10 years. And incidentally, the way to lower the cost of these alternative energies, and I hate to sound like a broken record, but it's to innovate in energy and to lower its cost and develop both cheap and clean energy. Energy can't just be cheap and it can't just be clean. It must be both cheap and clean, and that should be the goal of our energy innovations. Now, do you all know the word Solyndra? Is that news to anyone? So our government, some years ago, decided that energy was a high priority and we needed to do more research in it. Good thing. But more than that, we realized that after you develop a technology, you have to scale it up. And in particular, energy is a huge scale event. So certain agencies of the government were created not to do research in energy, but to do scale up in energy. And in particular, a huge fund was created to guarantee, laws were passed to allow the government, Department of Energy and its related agencies to guarantee federal loans for scale-up of energy projects. And along comes Solyndra, which received a loan of approximately $550 million and then immediately went bankrupt. So what went wrong there? Let me tell you what, I was not in the room, but I've been in 50 rooms just like it. And let me tell you what happened. One of the most complicated things you do in a startup is decide when and how much to scale up. So you develop your little algae bioreactor, 1 square meter, and you say, all right, let's go. It's going to cost money, but let's go up to 10 meters. Maybe we should go all the way to 100 meters, square meters. No, let's go up to a square kilometer. No, that's too risky. Because it turns out a lot of these technologies don't automatically scale. That is, they operate in a test tube, but they don't operate in a bucket. And then when you get them working in the bucket, they don't work in a tank, etc. So that's a very complicated judgment. So there are these board meetings that occur, and I've been to a lot of them where the board is asked, are we ready to scale up? And if so, should we scale up 2x, 5x, 10x, 100x? What should we do? And that is extremely complicated decision to make. So imagine Solyndra's board is meeting to consider. So they've got these cylindrical photo panels, solar panels. They got them working, and they're now making them in small quantities. And the question arises, should we build a big factory now? A reasonable question. And into the room walks a guy from the Department of Energy or a related agency. And he says, gosh, we got to hurry up. And we have 3 reasons to hurry up. 1, global warming is about to destroy the Earth. It's about to burst into flames, and we just got to hurry up and solve it, or it's going to be horrible. 2, the economy is in the tank, and we need jobs. Oh, so gosh, the sooner you build your plant and hire people, that'll be, what would that be? Green jobs we'll have. And 3rd, there's an election coming up, and we really want to win this election. And so therefore, we got to do it before November. So what do you guys want to do? Oh, by the way, I have $500 million that you could use to scale up your plant that I'm willing to lend you or guarantee the loan. What do you all want to do? And the board, which is already agonizing over this very complicated scaling decision in the face of all this urgency and in the face of $500 million, decides to go ahead and build a plant. And as soon as they finish the plant, it goes under immediately because they were making these solar panels for $6 and selling them for $3. So the better business got, the quicker they went out of business. They just, boom, like that. So the fact is Solyndra scaled too soon and too big. That's what went wrong, and it's at the core of managing the innovation of energy and how much we invest in it and when we invest, and it's a very complicated thing, and sending people from Washington with $500 million burning a hole in their pocket is probably not a good idea. A different thought, which I've had since coming to Texas, I moved here from Boston, before that California, and I've been to Houston now, and that is the energy capital of the world, and the people who inhabit Houston and our petroleum engineering department are the world's best energy engineers. We have a cluster, an innovation cluster here in Texas related to energy. And so it is now my bald-faced assertion that when we solve energy, it will be solved in Texas. Because these folks, particularly in Houston, know how to do large-scale thermodynamics, which is a skill that I don't have, for example. I'd also like to point out that Texas, which, by the way, did not sign the Kyoto Accords, invented horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracking, which has been reducing CO2 emissions. Natural gas has about 40% less carbon in it than coal and oil, principally coal. So by basically replacing coal plants with gas plants, we've been cutting our CO2 emissions, and already U.S. carbon emissions are down by 20%. Whereas all the people who signed the Kyoto Accords, all of their CO2 emissions are up. That should have been annoying. There's a few of you I know are really annoyed. I can tell by your face. And then, of course, I lived in Massachusetts, which is full of geniuses. There's 100 universities in the Boston area, 100 of them, very smart people. And green energy is a very high priority in Massachusetts, except when it comes to actually doing it. So there's this famous case of Nantucket Island. They're going to put wind farms off Nantucket Island. That argument has been going on for at least 12 years. There are still no wind farms off the island of Nantucket. Senators Kennedy and Kerry, who are very green, both objected to these wind farms, and that's called NIMBY, which is I'm in favor of green until you try to put it in off the coast of my summer house. Anyway, I like to rub my friends in Massachusetts rub their nose in the fact that while they're still arguing, the most recent argument, by the way, is that you couldn't build those towers because the Native Americans who used to live there have burial grounds which are now beneath the ocean. So how long ago was it that these Native Americans had their burial grounds when the ocean was, how long ago was that, 10,000 years? Anyway, that was the last objection to building these towers. Anyway, in Texas, already 8% of our electricity is being provided by wind power, as you can tell if you fly over West Texas and look at all the towers. So you can see how annoying that is in Massachusetts. But now let me repeat this point. So we have horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracking. We have a virtually infinite supply of domestic, relatively low carbon, relatively inexpensive energy. Isn't that great? However, we must not let us have that fact stop us from seeking alternative energies. And in particular, I list some here: wind and solar thermal and solar photovoltaic and geothermal fission, fusion. Also, developments in energy storage, a smart grid, distributed energy management. We must keep making progress on all these fronts. To the negative, venture investing in energy is in serious decline because a bunch of investments made during the global warming bubble did not pan out, like Solyndra, famous case, but there are many others. So the people who do venture investing have been withdrawing from energy investing, which is not good news for those of us who want to solve energy. On the other hand, another phenomenon is occurring, and this is predictable. There was a time when people said that energy investing was much harder than, say, software. because it required much larger amounts of money over much longer periods of time. And investors measure investments by the amount of time and the amount of money it takes. So oil and gas replacements, alternative energy, began to look like a very bad investment because it took a long time and a lot of money. And so about 3 years ago, it was generally, especially at the National Venture Capital Association, the position was that venture capital was not suitable for investment in energy, that we needed a new form of investing to do it. But then I noticed that drug discovery takes a lot of money and a long time, and yet the venture community was very active in drug discovery. And that's, in particular, startups were quite active in, were routinely partnered with and bought by big drug companies. So the difference between pharma and energy was that the incumbents had learned how to use startups and venture capital to innovate. They had learned how to interface with startups, how to buy them, how to partner with them. So the prediction was that the incumbents in energy just hadn't learned that yet, and they needed to learn how to play ball with startups and venture capital, and the evidence is that is beginning to happen. So you have the big incumbents with, there's a fund up in Houston that's General Electric, NRG, and Conoco. 100 startups in energy out of that fund. There's Chevron, Exxon investing $500 million in algae as a future form of energy. So I submit there's good news on that slide, the very last point, which is that even though venture investing is dropping off, partnering with the incumbents is on the rise. This is my last slide, and we do have 15 minutes. So this is a list of the, only crudely speaking, the energy investments of my venture capital firm, from which I am almost gone. I'm now an emeritus partner, but I'm not quite gone. And these are the companies we invested in during our energy phase. The red companies are companies that went directly out of business. So, for example, PsyCortex was a green supercomputing company that I lost $10 million in. And Wakanda only cost us $2 or $3 million because they started missing their technical milestones very early. And that's what if you're an investor, you want people to fail fast before you've spent a lot of money. And Green Fuel was another one of my investments, growing algae by taking flue gases from power plant emissions and feeding them to algae and then harvesting the algae and using that to create diesel. And that company went out of business suddenly. I was the CEO at the time, so you can blame it on me, but don't blame it on the algae. It was not the algae's fault. And there's a big algae effort here at UT, I might add, which I need to find out more about, because algae is quite a promising technology. So I'm hoping that looking at this, some of you might have some questions. So, the blue ones are the ones that I'm still active as a board member. So 1366, does anyone recognize the number 1366? It's called the solar constant, and it's the energy density arriving at Earth from the sun, 1,366 watts per square meter. The professor thought it'd be great if he called his company that, because that means I get to explain it every time I talk. Turns out only 1,000 watts actually makes it to the surface of the Earth, and that's at high noon. And at night, the number's 0. So and the trick there is to build solar wafers at half the cost or better than they're currently being made. The Infinite Power Solutions, that's a company which I wished I'd been in the room when they named it. Infinite Power Solutions makes the world's smallest batteries, solid state lithium-ion batteries. Psionics was an energy company, and they saw the solar industry, along with Solyndra, go down the tubes a couple of years ago. So instead of doing photovoltaics and enhancing silicon with their femtosecond lasers, they've switched to doing cameras that can see at night. So when you enhance silicon's ability to convert light to energy, you could either use it for solar energy, or you can use it for cameras, and they've gone off into camera land because it looks more promising. And then Sun Catalytics is a company that began by splitting water. The professor's idea was you take sunlight and you take water and you make hydrogen and oxygen, which is a way to store energy that you can later recover. So with our remaining 13 minutes, maybe you all could ask me some questions about these companies or anything that I've said, especially if it annoyed you. Go ahead.
What's the yellow?
Those are companies we sold. So, and Ember, I was chairman of Ember for 11 years. It's now part of Silicon Labs, which coincidentally is right outside my window downtown. And that's a coincidence. Those are existing companies that I am not on the board of. My other partners did those deals. So Sustainx is compressed air storage. Imagine a 18-wheeler full of scuba tanks. When you have energy, you pump air into it. When you need energy, you pump the air out of it. Nanosys is a maker of, they have very fundamental technology in nanowires that are useful in batteries and in LEDs. Questions? Sir?
You talked about how capital was exiting, in terms of VC capital that started towards essentially non-oil and gas technology, more or less. Why are you all, it sounds like your funds no longer, the VC firms are no longer focused on energy?
Yes, my firm, Polaris, as soon as I started leaving, there was no one to take my place to do energy. So Polaris is among the VCs who are no longer doing same reason.
Well, you mind summarizing the questions quickly so we can get?
Thank you. So yes, Polaris, the question had to do with withdrawal of investment capital in energy, and Polaris is an example of such a company. Although that may have been more influenced by I left to come here. But I was not replaced. The company, the partners, along with many other venture capitalists, don't see this particular style of investing as being fruitful in the near term. There are a few VC firms left that specialize in energy. Yeah.
So it's very interesting to hear about the strategic partnerships with large incumbents with startups. Can you explore that some more and give us more details and the structure of those, how it works, how they fund or support the startups, as much as you can take time on that?
Yeah, statistically, there are exceptions to everything, but most successful companies partner early. The question is, thank you. The question was, would I elaborate on the point of partnering, strategic partners for startups? And most of the good ones partner early. So a general system would be I'm calling this the Langer model because there's a professor at MIT called Bob Langer who did this with my VC firm 19 times. He comes to Polaris with 2 postdocs. They present 5 slides about their discovery. This is in the area of medical devices. Right after they present, we give them $2 million at a valuation of $2 million. They go off, develop something, come back, and they raise $8 million at a 2x step-up in valuation, and immediately we start partnering. So the VC firm contributes the management to the 2 postdocs. That forms the company. And then after a few milestones are met, partners are brought in. And the way that usually works is a partner wants that technology for one of their product lines, so a slice and dice license is given to them. So if you'll pay us huge amounts of money, we'll develop our technology for you to use in this particular use, and then we'll retain ownership of the rest. So you slice and dice the intellectual property there. And then the partner both funds your developments and then, at least in one market, takes them to market for you. And there are many variations on that, but that's the general method. So just looking up here, last time I looked, Sustainx had partnership with AES, American Electric, a huge energy company, who promised to buy their first energy storage 18-wheeler full of scuba tanks, and then sent people to help do the development and then a place to put it when it was built to try it out in the grid. So this is grid-scale energy storage. In the case of Nanosys had 20 partners because their technology is so broad. Battery companies and LED companies, and it goes on and on. Other questions? Yes.
First, thank you for coming to speak to us today. I'm curious as to then what you conceive of as being the government's role in either research and development and or commercialization around emerging technology and energy, either in the fossil fuels realm or the renewables realm. What to you is the ideal model there?
It's the Department of Energy not having national laboratories, of which there are, I don't know, 7 or 8. A lot of the R&D money that goes into DOE gets spent on the national labs. And a lot of the professors I know, and in my experience, that money is generally not maximally used because those are basically jobs programs. The national labs all have 2 senators and a bevy of representatives attached, and their job is to grow jobs, not produce scientific results. So now that should really be annoying, especially if you work at one of the national labs. In any case, the DOE should be, answer your question, shrewdly allocating its research budget to research universities. And why do I prefer research universities over Bell Labs, over labs like Bell Labs or like Livermore or like Argonne, etc., is because universities graduate students. And in my experience, students are the vehicles of innovation. They leave the university and they carry the innovations forward. So it would be the funding of research. Now, some of that, the National Science Foundation would also be on that list. They've begun doing something I find interesting, which is they're now beginning to fund what they call translational work that is further downstream of the basic research aimed at commercialization. So there's a valley of death, they call it, right after research, where it's hard to get new research out into commercialization because it's not quite ready yet. And the National Science Foundation has put a program in called I-Corps, not just that program, but at least that's aimed at trying to get their research results across this valley of death toward commercialization. You seem to have another question ready.
No, I was just curious. I mean, it's more on the research side, but then on the commercialization side, of course, you are touting the diffusion of wind in Texas, and of course, that's entirely the result of federal subsidy. So I was just curious about.
Well, it's interesting that you chose the word entirely. Who built the towers? General Electric and Vesta, and they engineered those towers, right?
And if you look at energy prices at night,
I'm sorry, I missed that.
energy prices at night in Texas, it's zeroed out. And there's
Right, so we better hurry up and develop storage so that we can have energy when the wind is not blowing and collect it when it is. Yeah, the role of government and private industry, of course, they're both involved. And then the argument, like the internet was originally developed out of the Department of Defense, ARPA, that put in my estimate would be like $50 million of research over a 10-year period into building the internet. And then the internet got built. So that if you listen to me touting private enterprise, you'll say, well, that was built by my company, for example, and all the other companies. And then there are the people who say, no, the whole internet should be free to everyone because it was built by the taxpayers. But then, you have to go look at, how did that actually all happen? So yes, there were government subsidies involved in those wind systems. In fact, I'm arguing for that. Remember, I argued earlier that we shouldn't be increasing the cost of energy, we should be decreasing it, and the net effect of those subsidies. So subsidies would be another form of reducing the cost of the new energies to make them more favorable against the old energies. So I'm not exactly against those subsidies, but I do think they're superior to raising the price of oil and gas. The trouble, of course, is such subsidies in Germany and Spain and Portugal almost bankrupted the country. They were subsidizing solar. They're stopping now. They just can't afford it anymore. So I'm hurrying my company, 1366, to hurry up and finish commercializing its really cheap wafers so that we can suddenly afford solar energy and it won't bankrupt us to install it. I loved your use of the word touting. That's exactly what I was doing. Other questions? Sir.
My question is, within the modern capitalism, how do you compare the payout to capitalists versus payout to middle-level labor workers? And what should be the right risk premium for venture capital?
I can't possibly answer that question. Did you all hear? Oh, the question was deeply ideological. What is the proper payoff of labor versus capital? Yeah, 11. It's the way we the way we have historically answered that question in the United States is through market forces, which affect both the price of labor and the price of capital and the price of the factors of production. So that question gets answered dynamically in the ebb and flow of supply and demand. I don't know how to answer that question. It's obviously very topical because right now the capitalists are being vilified by our current government. So it's clear what they think about the answer to that question. Yes?
You say that energy should be both clean and cheap, and the bulk of your presentation is about how market forces act to make those cheaper. But in the context of energy, without external intervention, what forces exist to create, to force that energy to be cleaner as opposed to?
Well, there are, the energy just got cleaner, right?
Through fracking?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's serendipitous.
Then my answer is serendipity. It just happened.
It would, I mean, if natural gas was 200% more polluting than it is, I mean, it still would have happened because it was cheaper. It didn't happen because it was clean.
I don't actually know the answer to that. There are regulations about, I mean, the energy industry is highly regulated, so I have to believe there's some pressure toward cleaner energy, right? Certainly automobiles are being regulated heavily on their energy. There are carbon emissions. So there are, I'm not against all government regulation, certainly not. But in this argument, which is very similar to this argument, which is very hard to win in a single moment, occasionally something serendipitous occurs, like, wow, all that talk about monetizing the externalities and carbon taxes and so on, that all was had, and then these cowboys in Houston have reduced, roughly speaking, the carbon emissions of the United States by 20%, and not entirely due to fracking, but largely. Actually, they're solving three problems. One is our energy is has been getting expensive, and that hurts the economy. Second, our energy has been coming from outside the U.S. and frequently from places who want to kill us. And third is it's dirty. Coal and gas produce CO2 and other pollutants that are maybe even worse. So there's really three problems being solved by that combination of fracking and horizontal drilling. So that's cause for celebration, even if it is serendipitous. Yeah.
We're out of time. Let's thank Bob for...
Thanks very much.